And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Trust and Estates Weekly. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I'm here every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about estate planning and trust and probate administration, primarily from the standpoint of other professionals like myself, but also for those of you who either are working on your own estate plan, or maybe you've been made the executor of an estate and you're trying to figure out what you need to do. So this show is also designed to help you gain the knowledge you need to do that kind of work and to communicate better with the various advisors that are helping you out. So today, I'm very pleased to have back as my guest Michael Zwick. You can see his subtitle there, the Probate PI. Michael, if you didn't see the first show we did together, now I think about a year and a half ago, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So Michael tracks down missing heirs and assets for estates, among some other things that are not particularly probate and trust related. And because we hadn't spoken for a while, I asked Michael to come back on the show. I want to, first of all, hopefully dive in a little bit more deeply into what Michael does and how he does it, and also see, what may be going on that's has changed in the last 18 or 24 months since you were on the show. So Michael, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So let's start for some of the people viewing it. My viewership is much larger now than it was last time. So tell us a little bit about your background so people can understand who you are and what you do.
Sure. So I started my professional life as an attorney almost 25 years ago. Started as a little side business, recovering unclaimed money sitting in government treasuries, whether state unclaimed property divisions or other government agencies. I started with two partners and we started doing it part-time. And after all, kind of grew where, we still do that kind of work. We also are applying the skills and knowledge that we learned in that arena to the trust and probate world, where there are missing heirs or beneficiaries, or someone has died and didn't tell anyone what assets they own. So that's the work we do. We find either people who are due inheritance, or we find the inheritance that people can't find.
Right. And so I would imagine, because you come with a legal background, so you understand more of the intricacies of probate administration than perhaps just a regular, I guess, sort of private investigator. Is that reasonable to say, or?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, frankly, I didn't practice much probate when I was practicing law, but it definitely helps to have the knowledge of not only of probate law, but also just to, first of all, how to look up and read statutes or case law. Just the other day, for example, I had a case where we needed to find heirs for an estate where the father's side of the estate was unknown, and I had to look up the relevant state law as to how far out on you on the family tree to define the heirs. So coming from the legal world, it helped me in terms of being able to just know where to find the statute and how to read it. But it comes to play in other arenas, because you never know what other legal issues might come up that could affect somebody's heirship or relationship to somebody, whether it could be having adopted into the family, adopted out of the family. Sometimes you have issues where an heir might have committed a crime or something like that. So many different legal issues that might come up, that helps to have that knowledge and background in order to either know the issues or know how to find the issues.
Yeah. I mean, that makes perfect sense. Interestingly, just a few weeks ago, I did a show, I should say, on the laws of descent and distribution here in California, and they're quite complex. I'm not a lawyer, as viewers know, but I deal with a lot of legal issues and reading statutes and such, and even given that background, it was a challenge to kind of parse through all that information. So, what would cause someone? First of all, who would typically engage you, and what would cause that person to want to do a search for heirs? So, and I'll give you a sense of where the question is coming from. I handle typically disputed probates where the heirs have descended into sort of two or more warring camps, right? And the last thing they want is for yet another heir to be identified, because now that means, the pie is going to be sliced even more thinly. So, who would initiate, a search for additional heirs, and why? What are the reasons why they typically do that?
Okay, so lots unpacking in that.
Yeah.
So first of all, in terms of the pie getting smaller, obviously, when people are signing documents for court, including the petition where they're laying out who the heirs are, whether they know where they are or not, on the bottom of every one, it says basically there's a statement that says that everything in there is, to my knowledge, true under penalty of perjury. So people are going to put it in there, hopefully they'll put it in there, even if it means they're going to get less. So yeah, usually our finding people does reduce the amount, but often it's more that there's one. If for example, they're trying to find one heir is missing, just for example, 1 out of the 10 heirs. If that 10th heir can't be found, it's not as if the other 9 heirs get to divvy up that person's money. In most states, that person's money will be just set aside and deposited with either the county or the state to hold for that person, usually in perpetuity, meaning no one else can touch it anyways. California and Michigan are 2 notable exceptions to that rule, that after a certain period of time, it can be divvied up. So in those states, there is a little bit of a disincentive to find people who quote unquote are missing. So who's calling us tends to usually be, sometimes it's the executor or trustee who's handling the estate, but sometimes, more often than not, it's the attorney who's representing them. The reason they call is because, first of all, they just want to do the right thing. They want to make sure that everyone's getting what they want. They want to honor the last wishes of the deceased, and they also want to follow the law. They don't want to get into trouble. And I have seen where cases where someone has just conveniently omitted the knowledge of a person's existence or whereabouts. We once handled a case where there were 3 children of the deceased, and we came in after the fact, after the money had been deposited with the county, and it was very simple to find the 3rd child, who the other 2 said didn't know where he was. Turns out he was living within just a few miles of them, and their attitude was, well, he was not a good son. He stole money from his mother, blah, blah, blah. I don't remember but they could have made that argument initially and said he stole, therefore he shouldn't get his inheritance. And they could have put that on the record, but instead they chose a deceptive manner to do so by just, we don't know where he is. And I think they were hoping after a number of years, they could just collect his money. Fortunately, we found him and he was able to get his money, and the court said, you have a theft claim against him. They take that up in a separate proceeding. But to answer your question, usually it's going to be the attorneys. And one of the reasons also, in addition to want to do the right thing and also do the legal thing, is that when you can't find someone in many jurisdictions, it makes the proceedings take that much longer and get more complicated. So it really slows things down for everybody else, because you have to have sometimes a petition to determine, what to do with this person's money, deposit with the county or whatever. And until that is done, you can't settle and distribute the rest of the estate. And in some jurisdictions, especially like in Los Angeles County, where you can wait months and months just for a hearing on a very simple matter, that can really slow things down.
Right.
So it really is to the benefit of everybody to have a company like mine come in and find those people and get them in there right away so that everything can move more smoothly.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. So it sounds like um, when we talk about missing heirs, they're missing in the sense that people know that they at least at one time existed. They just don't know where they're living or something like that, as opposed to just sort of an open-ended search for somebody who might be related to the decedent.
Well, there could be those cases as well. I mean, we see that where someone dies and the executor trustee, so it could be someone who's appointed by the court or just another person or else, like, we don't know who the person is. We're handling a case right now for out of upstate New York where someone died and I'm not sure. I haven't got into who the executor is relative. I think the executor is a maternal heir, and she's like, I don't know anything about the father's side of the family. So she's like, we don't even know who to contact to let them know that there's an estate going there. So we had to do a search. It turns out there were no paternal heirs because the father was an only child, and under most states' laws, the farthest you go on the family tree are the descendants of the grandparents, meaning aunts and uncles and their children or grandchildren. So it turns out there were no aunts and uncles, so therefore nobody else. But also one of the reasons that somebody calls us is sometimes you got to find the heirs, even if they're not inheriting anything. There's a common misconception that the person who's inheriting is an heir. An heir is simply someone who is the closest relative to the deceased, regardless of whether they're inheriting anything. So you could have someone who, for example, has children but leaves everything to charity. The children are heirs, but they're not getting anything. And so anybody who's an heir, whether they're children or nieces or nephews or cousins, whatever, they're entitled, at least from the beginning of the proceeding, to notice of the proceeding, to know that there is something's been filed, that there's a will, and they can object, if they want, if they think there are grounds to object to the will. So sometimes that's what we get hired to do as well, is just simply find the current address. Like, we don't even have, our job does not entail getting in contact with the heirs or getting them money because they're not getting anything. We're just providing the most current information so that the executor can give notice. Again, if they can't do that, that can really slow the proceedings a lot.
Gotcha. Okay. Interesting. So just to make sure I'm understanding this, so someone can be an heir without, I get the part, they can be an heir without actually being entitled to any share of the estate. Now,
Right.
in this, are we talking about any relative of the decedent, or are we talking about someone who has legal standing as an heir, even though they may not be collecting any money? Or
So it's legal standing. So there's a priority of who is defined as an heir, and if there's somebody above that priority level, anybody below it doesn't get anything. So, for example, I said aunts and uncles and cousins can be heirs, but they aren't if the deceased left children or grandchildren, because that's as far as it's going to go. If the person didn't leave children or grandchildren, then you look to see, okay, did they leave any aunts or uncles? And if there are no aunts and uncles, did they leave, first cousins or first cousin once removed? So, whether you could have two people, next door neighbors who both lost a first cousin, and one of them will be an heir, one of them won't, because one of them, there could be someone in between, more closely related to the deceased, and the other one doesn't have someone more closely related.
Okay. So, like a third cousin, fifth removed, which, to be honest with you, I'm not even sure, how that works. But, you hear all these things about very distant relatives, or like you watch, Downton Abbey, and, this guy I think he is like a third cousin or something like this. He ends up inheriting the title. So someone like that is still considered an heir, even though they're so far distant, isn't really related, or
so most states limit it, as I mentioned earlier, to only going so far out in the family tree. Usually, it's most states limit it to either the descendants of grandparents, so aunts and uncles or their descendants, or descendants of the great grandparents. So it could be, great aunts and uncles and their descendants, and that's pretty much as far as I go. I want to say, and I haven't dealt with it in a while, I believe California is the only state. California has, I believe, has a rule, or at least it used to, that if there's money for missing heirs after the proceeding, then at that point, anybody, no matter how far out on the family tree, as long as they can prove they're related, can come claim that money. But that is a outlier of a law. Most states say if there are no known heirs, then the money just goes to the county or the state, and the county or state gets to keep the money.
Okay, so it becomes a process of a escheat after if there are no heirs.
And that's actually the original definition of a escheat goes back to old Merry England, where it meant that if somebody died without heirs, their property became the property of the crown of the kingdom. So nowadays we use the word escheat. Escheat is used a little more widely than it should be now. Escheat refers just to unclaimed assets that are dormant for a certain period of time, regardless of whether the owner is alive or dead, or the owner is a corporation. That's a whole different story.
Gotcha. Okay, let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Michael. When life brings unexpected changes, managing inherited property shouldn't add to your stress. Magnum Properties specializes in probate and trust real estate management. We handle the complexities while you focus on what matters most. From property maintenance to tenant relations, from legal compliance to maximizing value, we're your trusted partner through every step. Magnum Properties, Inc., turning property challenges into peace of mind. Call us today at 213-264-4396 or visit magnumprops.com. So this is Trust and Estates Weekly, and I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel. My guest is Michael Zwick, who is essentially an attorney turned private investigator who finds heirs and assets. And we've been talking about the process of finding heirs, the whys and the hows and the wherefores and that sort of thing. So Michael, how does the process work? I mean, does somebody gives you a name or and then I don't know, you put on your Sherlock Holmes hat and start sleuthing through the streets? I mean, that would seem to not be a very efficient way to work. So I'm curious, how is it that you find these people?
Well, I'm more of a Magnum PI guy, so I'll put on one of my Hawaiian shirts instead.
Okay.
But no. So it really depends, first of all, what kind of case it is, whether it's whether they don't know the identities or whereabouts of either all the heirs or a group of the heirs. Like I mentioned earlier, they knew the maternal heirs, but they didn't know who the paternal heirs were. So we're starting from scratch, and we had no idea whether we're going to find 0 heirs or we might find out 20 or 25, versus where there's money for a specific person. We have cases where we get a call and says, I've got $250,000 inheritance to give to the niece, Michelle, but we can't find her. So we're not, contrary to what you might think. And we're not out there, going on the streets and knocking on doors so much, at least not right away. It's a lot of ordering documents, accessing databases. We tend to, it's funny, a few years ago, the insurance company used for our general, company insurance, like every company has, notified us one day that they were no longer carrying us because they didn't realize that we're a private investigation agency. And we had a whole back and forth them, explaining to them, in terms of the risk of hurting other people or whatever, we're probably much more in line with an accounting firm than we are with a private investigation firm. And nobody in my company carries a gun. We don't do surveillance. To the extent we're actually out on the street, it's because someone's driving to a courthouse to pick up some documents. Occasionally, yes, we will go knock on someone's door. We don't really meet a lot of our clients face to face, but that's partly because we get cases from all over the country, and our heirs can be anywhere in the world. We do have cases where we do meet them, especially, but that's usually more in the beginning, where they are understandably dubious about whether what we're telling them is real, because we're calling people going, hey, great news, we found money for you. And we understand they're going to be a little skeptical.
Right.
So sometimes having a face-to-face in-person meeting can help. So in those cases, or sometimes we will just go knock on a door. If we just can't get a hold of someone, we might just go knock on the door where we think that person's living. But that doesn't happen too often. Most of my work is done in front of a computer and on a telephone. And that's goes for most of my staff.
Interesting. So switching gears here a little bit, on the asset side of the equation, well, for heirs, okay, so we can typically get a sense, okay, did the person have children? Did the person get married? Right. So I would guess many times there's at least some sense of whether a person, exists, although you mentioned some cases where not. But how does it come about that, an asset becomes lost? And I'll sort of play this out. So like in one of the estates that I'm administrating, we're 2 years into the administration, and I think maybe 6 months ago, I was going through some folder, and I found a document that appeared to indicate the estate might own a property in Cabo San Lucas, and I was able to figure it out, but short of a piece of paper, identifying something, I would have had no idea that potentially there was an asset, that I didn't know about. And I mean, in theory, I guess I could have every single estate I administrate investigated for, for quote unquote missing assets, but I would have no idea about how, where to direct you or anything like that. I mean, so aside from checking, lost property in the state in which, the decedent lived and maybe did business, or the states in which the decedent lived and did business, I would have no idea, where to, or even if I should search for assets. So how does that aspect of things come about for you?
So, typically we only get involved in cases where the heirs are starting from scratch. They just don't know, because, we that kind of work we do on a contingency fee basis. We only get paid for what we find. So if they come to us and says, hey, we've already found this, this, and this, but we would just want to make sure we got everything, I'll usually decline that case, because at that point, the odds of us finding something are so much smaller. In terms of how things get lost, people buy, open bank account, multiple bank accounts. I think back to this years ago, my grandfather, who's been gone now for 31 years, he lived in the Lower East Side of New York, and he used to just, back in the day when they'd give out, toaster ovens or alarm clocks whenever you open an account. He had a whole closet full of these appliances that he would then give out as gifts to people. And he, so he would just go around to all the different banks in the neighborhood, and he just, every so often, if he found out they were giving us something, he'd open up another account and he'd put another $100. But sometimes, some people are very secretive about what they have. Some people, there could be a variety of reasons, and sometimes they invest in assets and just forget about them. I remember years ago we had a case where this was unclaimed property, but we found about $600,000 of blue chip stock that had been, of Pepsi Cola and some other ones, that some woman had bought stock years and years before. She listed her two sons as the co-owners of these stocks, and then she passed away. She never told them about it. She probably bought the stock, when it was much, many, many years before, invested with whatever the case might be. Never told them about it. We found them, and they're both like long distance truck drivers. And all of a sudden they're getting this, this nice added inheritance. There are a whole variety of reasons why assets could be. So, you mentioned it, you do something that's very smart, which is go onto the unclaimed property site where the person lived. Unfortunately, not every company or bank or insurance company reports money to unclaimed property. So, what we do is when we take on a case is I'll talk to the family, talk to, a relative or two, and get draw a profile up of the person, find out, what did they do for a living if they worked outside the house? Did they have any hobbies? Did they travel? Did they variety of things, and then we can sort of draw that profile up as to where assets might be. For example, if the person was worked for one big company for a number of years, we'll go, well, let's see if there's a pension out there. Some sort of pension or retirement accounts. Same thing with if they work for a government agency for a while. So it really depends. You really have to, like it says, look at the person. And part of it is because we've been doing unclaimed property recovery for 25 years, is we do know what kind of assets do get left behind and kind of where to look for them. Unfortunately, contrary to what people think, though, we do not have some sort of special database that just has everybody's assets on it. I wish we had such a thing, but as far as I know, it doesn't exist, at least not in private hands.
Well, what's interesting is, in theory, like for the state of California, for example, the unclaimed property, you can go online and you put in the person's name, or I typically will put in a few permutations of the person's name, right? But most of the time, what I find, it would cost me more to file the paperwork than I would be able to recover. It's like $2.38.
Yeah,
right?
I know my paternal grandmother, who passed away 40 years ago, has $50 or $60 with the state of Michigan. And my father knows about it, but they said, hey, we're in the death certificate, which if my father doesn't have one, that would cost $25 to get a copy of it.
Right.
And then he'd have to do an affidavit and showing that he's splitting it 3 ways between him and his 2 siblings. Like, at that point, for him to get, the $7 or $8 or whatever it is just not worth it.
Yeah. And California, it's the same thing. Death certificate and the affidavit has to be notarized.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's really, the notarization actually is not that big of an issue, because pretty much any bank has a notary, and I think post office can also do it. So that's actually, I consider, unless someone's homebound, is not the biggest one. And states, by the way, I think some states are starting to accept virtual notarization.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, California is not among them yet.
Yeah.
So, kind of, here in the United States, and I think this is true of all the jurisdictions, like titles to property are recorded, and there's pretty strict banking regulations and regulations on security accounts and all that kind of stuff. But once you get outside of the United States, so for example, I've had a couple of situations of dealing with potential property in Mexico, and the sense I get is the systems for keeping track of ownership of property are not as, I don't know, robust, thorough. I don't even know what the right word is. And maybe even more importantly, as easily searchable as they are here in the United States. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts, because you do work worldwide. So what are some of the challenges once you get outside the United States?
It's definitely a challenge in many countries, because you don't appreciate until you start doing the kind of work I do outside the United States that America is a very open country in terms of its information and records. The ability, you just to land, but it's also, you can look up if someone's got also, any sort of watercraft or aircraft, is not that many people have, but those are registered. But there are other assets that are, you can find out about. The fact that, like, they even have unclaimed property, a lot of states don't have, a lot of countries don't have that. So it can definitely present the challenge. And that also goes for finding people. US, there are ways, we have some databases that we subscribe to. We have to go through security clearance to get it and whatnot. And they're not cheap either. But they allow me to look into, and I could, if I wanted to, look up somebody's past addresses and who are relatives of theirs and stuff like that. Whereas, as far as I know, that's not really available in many other countries. I mean, there are definitely databases of people where, like back the old days of, I was just telling my kids the other day about how when I met my wife, their mother, 3 years ago, I, met her and I called information and I got her phone number. And my kids are like, whoa, my kids are like, slow down for a second. You called a number to get mom's number? I was like, yeah, that's how it worked back then. But like,
phone book.
there's still that to some extent in other countries, but not nearly what the U.S. has in terms of information. And it really varies from country to country. We've located people in dozens of countries throughout the world, but there are some countries I wouldn't even bother trying. North Korea, Cuba. Right now, Cuba is starting to open up, and if I knew people on the ground, maybe, but there are certain countries, and also not only is it a matter of finding them, but then also getting contract with them, and then also getting their money to them, which, frankly, I try to do good. We have a mission in our company to help people, but also it is a business, and I want to make sure we get paid. And getting paid from someone in Cuba is a lot less likely than getting paid by someone in Louisiana.
Yeah, indeed. All right, we're going to take another quick break, and we'll be back for more. Probate and Trust TV, your curated source for the most useful and insightful content on estate planning and trust and probate administration, featuring standout professionals like Bill Gross, Paul Brabelet, James Cunningham, and yours truly. Whether you're a lawyer, accountant, real estate professional, or working on your own succession plan, this channel helps you quickly find the clearest, most practical content YouTube has to offer. Subscribe now to Probate and Trust TV. Spend more time learning, less time searching. So we're back again with Trust and Estates Weekly. I'm Kevin Bemmel, your host, and my guest is Michael Zwick. We've been talking about finding lost heirs and assets. Quite a fascinating discussion. We were just talking about countries where it's virtually impossible to find either. Places like North Korea and Cuba. That certainly makes sense. What about countries that are typically more open, like, I don't know, Canada, Mexico, countries in Europe. How do those compare to the United States?
So it definitely is easier in some countries rather than others. Like I said, Australia is actually a much better country about finding people. England is. Obviously it's a little easier in English-speaking countries because we that's one less barrier to deal with. Once we get into other countries, then we need someone, and we do have some foreign languages on staff, but we get in, if we have to find someone in certain countries, we'd have much harder time than others. So really, like I said, it really just depends on the country in terms of what they have. Also, we do have colleagues who in other countries around the world that do what we do, and we will partner with them on certain things if we need someone on the ground to get into records or to go knock on someone's door and speak their language to them. We have that ability, fortunately, usually throughout all of Europe and into Asia. It hasn't been as much of an issue going into Africa because we just haven't had that many cases. But we definitely have, because we have an association with other companies that we partner with, and sometimes they'll call us, sometimes we'll get a call from someone in England saying, hey, I've got a case and I've got someone, can you help me find the person there, or even go knock on their door and get them, get them to sign, like I was talking about earlier about, overcoming that skepticism.
Right. So, oh shoot! I had a follow-up question, and now I dropped it. Well, so I'll move on to the next topic. So, this is what it was. So you were talking earlier about how having a lost heir can delay the administration of an estate. So, typically, how long does, if there is a typically in this case, how long does it take to find an heir and kind of get that person get that person's contact information or whatever, so that the administration can proceed?
There really varies. We've had ones where we can find, it could take me longer to log on to the database that we use than it would take me to actually find the person, depending on how much information we have. I think back to a case we had a number of years ago where we knew the guy's name. We knew he had lived in Orlando and Las Vegas, and his name was unique. And it took me literally once I logged onto the database, putting in whatever data we had, I found them within seconds. And fortunately, he was very open. He signed with us the next day. Great, no problem. Other times we're starting with no known heirs, and we really have to build out the family tree from scratch. That can be more difficult, especially because sometimes the starting point usually is, okay, person out with no known heirs. We need to find out. So we're filling out the family tree that starts with the parents of the deceased.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we'll have the parents' names, but then we got to dig into the parents' relatives, who their parents were, their siblings were. Sometimes that information is available on online databases and resources that we have, but sometimes it means we have to order parents' death certificate, because
Mm-hmm.
that will contain the names of their parents and if they're married or stuff like that, and ordering death certificates, sometimes we can get in a few days, but sometimes it could take a few months just to get one single piece of paper, and everything's held up until then. So much of it varies based on the unique circumstance of the case, but also, what jurisdiction we're dealing with. So like I said, some states we can get a death certificate turn around in a day or two. Some of them, even if you want to rush order, it can take a month or two.
Wow. So, I mean, it really sounds like, especially on the heir side of the equation, it's almost like you're a genealogist, right?
Yeah, genealogy is definitely part of what we do. I mean, I was just on Ancestry for about an hour this afternoon working on a case.
So I can imagine you're like pouring through records of what was the big port of entry in New York that people always
Ellis Island,
right?
Yeah.
And things like that. I mean, I think there are online databases where they record people's names and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the most popular and well-known one is Ancestry.com, which we use, and it's definitely comes in handy. But there are other resources. Sometimes we go into databases of newspapers to look at obituaries, because then it tells us who's related to whom.
Wow.
And sometimes it's on the ground. Sometimes, like, I've gone to cemeteries where, because if I know, okay, there's this one uncle, that's the only name I know, but I know there might be others. I might go to the cemetery and say, okay, who's buried next to that uncle? And that, who's buried around that uncle. So that might tell me who else, what are other relatives. If I see someone with the same name, that's going to tell me they're probably relative as well.
I mean, it's so interesting. The minute you mentioned it, of course, yeah, it makes sense, because typically when you go to a cemetery, you'll see, several graves, oftentimes with the same last name. So then they're probably connected. But it never would have occurred to me to do that, on my own, which is, of course, the benefit of having, a professional and a specialist. So, we're kind of coming up on our time here in a few minutes, but talk to me, if you would, about some of the most unusual situations that you've handled and how they worked out. I think that helps people. It helps sort of, joggle people's minds into, oh, I didn't think about that. That may be something I should look into.
So let's see. I mean, we obviously had some interesting cases over the years of, in this, some of the law depends on it. In California, for example, we had a case a number of years ago it was a couple that never had children, and unfortunately they were elderly. One was homebound, but the other one who cared for her passed away suddenly, and the homebound one was left sitting there until she passed away. And the problem. So under California law, all their joint assets split, even though it was conclusively determined that the wife that the wife lived longer by at least a couple of days, if not longer. So therefore, on the California law, everything should have gone to her, should have gone, him, then to her. And then, but under California law, again, having a unique law on this subject, the law was that everything split with half going to her heirs and half going to his heirs. And it was one of his nieces that was handling the estate. She's like, I have no idea who the other heirs are. So we stepped in, we found the one heir, but then we found another asset. We found a mobile home and lot in Reno, Nevada, one thing to understand is that probate is always done or should be done in the state and county where the deceased last resided, except for if there's real estate in another state, because real estate is governed by the state where the real estate lays. So in this case, they had property in Nevada, so that was controlled by Nevada law. Nevada law says no, because it was conclusively determined that the wife survived long enough after him to by law, that it was only her estate that got the proceeds of the sale of the Nevada property. And there's also we had to open up a separate proceeding in Nevada to deal with that. There also was a property in Houston, Texas, but it was so worthless. It wasn't worth it. We just abandoned it because it wasn't worth the cost of opening an estate. I mean, it was worth just pennies.
Wow.
So part of it is really familiarizing yourself with the unique laws. And I would say, I am a lawyer. I don't practice law anymore, so I'm not giving out any legal advice. But unless it's a really simple estate, get a lawyer because there might be nuances to the estate you're not even thinking about.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Michael, again, I really appreciate you. Wait, sorry. One last question before I let you go. What, if anything, has changed in what you do over the last couple of years, and any kind of updates on those from that perspective?
Not so much. I mean, I don't think in our area that technology has really come too much or advanced things that much. I know from having read of what people who in my line of work did back in the 80s or 90s, where they literally had stacks of phone books by their desks. They would have phone books from all over the country in case they ever needed one, or if they didn't, they call a company and say, hey, can you send me your phone book? And they have to go with a pager, and every time they from the road they didn't have cell phones. So I'd say in the last 10 to 15 years, I think the biggest thing though I would say is probably the amount of data, like the sites, sources like Ancestry or newspaper.com. They're always adding more sources because those sites are basically collating data. They're collating information and documents for you. You don't just put a name and it spits out a report for you. You actually have to wade through the documents and glean the data that you need. And so one of the things is they're just adding new data every day. They're adding new databases to their stuff. For example, every 10th year ending in number 2, the census records from 72 years earlier become public record. So in 2032, the 1960 census records will come online. And for people like me, that's a bonanza. That's because that's just a whole major set of information out there that's not available. So I think that's the biggest thing. It's just more and more information is coming into these databases to help us.
So, and this is kind of a question. I don't know how many people will be interested in this, but I'm interested in this because I'm dealing with this in my own practice. How, if at all, is large language models and other AI features, how is that impacting what you do? Are you able to get productivity gains there and such, or is it pretty much?
I will admit to being somewhat of a Luddite in that. I do use AI for certain things, but I more for management than actual research. But I I have thought about just now, literally thought of like, hey, what if I give in the narrative of a thing and tell AI to produce the family tree for me, so I don't have to map it out. Now that I think about it, I'm going to have to try that.
Well, because you mentioned having to, sort of pour through documents. I mean, like I know I can upload a document to, Chat GPT and I can say, hey, find, X, Y, or Z. And I think it'll do that. So,
Right.
It just curious because, this is listening to, business podcasts and such. This is an ongoing topic, right? How this is going to impact all of our businesses. And
yeah, it definitely is. It's just a matter of, like I said, my putting some thought into it.
Right. Yeah. I've been able to become more productive, but it takes some initial thought at how am I going to, make this happen. Well, Michael, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. It's been a great conversation, and hopefully we'll have you on again sooner than a year and a half or 2 years from now. So
love to.
Great. So I'm going to have you hang tight here for a minute. I'm going to do a quick wrap up. So thank you so much for joining me today, and my guest, Michael. Really appreciate you checking out the show. If you have any questions, comments, criticisms, links to social media will be in the show notes after the episode posts on YouTube. Happy to hear them. If you want to get in touch with Michael, I'll put his contact information in the show notes as well. Shameless, I'm going to give him a shameless plug. I always do, but I've known Michael for a while now, and I can tell you that he's both a very decent man. We've gotten to know each other as friends as well as professional colleagues, and absolutely tops in what he does. Don't let his very sort of humble demeanor fool you into thinking anything other than he's really at the top of the business of finding heirs and assets. So Michael's contact information will be in the show notes. And then so just real quickly, tomorrow, Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. And Wednesday at 10 a.m. is my show, People Making Money. So hopefully I'll see you later on in the week. And again, thank you so much for joining me. Michael, again, thanks for being a guest on the show. And just signing off as I always do, Marie, darling, you are my belle. Courage at all times, my friends.